Chapter 29 of the Boy Scouts' First Campfire. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Boy Scouts' First Campfire by Herbert Carter. Springing the Trap. When Tad Brewster was thus making his way into the hole in the rocks, perhaps he may have remembered reading what old Israel Putnam, the Revolutionary hero, did when a mere stripling, entering the den of a savage wolf and dragging the beast out after him. Well, in a way, Tad was doing just as brave an act. True, those whom had reason to fear were human beings like himself, but they must be cruel men, since he knew them to be desperate characters, and if they discovered him invading their retreat, no doubt they would attack him with the ferocity of wolves. He found himself in a passageway among the rocks. It had evidently been well traveled by the feet or knees of the men who may have long concealed themselves in the snug retreat, while officers were searching the surrounding country in vain for clues to their hiding place. Thad started when he suddenly heard a gruff voice. It sounded so very close by that his first thought was that he had been discovered. But as he caught the words that were spoken, he realized his mistake. "Maybe you'll be sorry now you bothered a couple poor fellows a-trying hard to make a few honest dollars taking game out of season and selling the same to rich folks what just has to have it any old time. Just sit up and tell me what your friends are thinking of doing about it." Then Thad was thrilled to hear the voice of his chum respond. Evidently, if the men had kept some sort of muffler over Smithy's mouth during the time they were bringing him to their underground retreat, it had now been removed, as if they no longer feared that he would bring the others down upon them. "Why, you see, we just wanted to explore this queer island, and that's all there is to it. Yes, we did rather guess that somebody must have been taking fish or game when the law was shut down on it, but then, you see, that was none of our business. We're just Boy Scouts off on a camping trip, and nobody's employed us to bother with game poachers or send words to the wardens." "Game wardens, hey? You seem to let that slip off your tongue, younker, like you might be used to saying the same. What we want to know is, why are you so pesky anxious like to look this here island over? Lost anything here?" "Well, a boat we had seems to have disappeared in a funny way," Smithy said, and Tad could not notice anything like a tremble in the tenderfoot's voice, which fact pleased him greatly. "Huh! That boat belonged to us in the first place, younker, and ye hooked it from us. 'Spect you thought boats just growed in the bushes like wild plums when you run across that, huh? Well, they don't, and you had no business to take it. And what's more, me and my pal think you meant to let the wardens know about what we've been doing up this way." Smithy made no reply, and Tad knew why. The tenderfoot was well aware of what his chum had been doing while wigwagging Allan. He also knew that in all probability Giraffe must even then be on his way over to Rockford to get the Faversham chief on the phone and give him a message that would bring the whole police force hustling over to Omega Lake, bent on making a big haul. "Don't try to deny it, do you, younker?" the man continued to growl, and from the fitful light that rose and fell, Tad found reason to believe that there must be some sort of fire around the bend in the passage. "Well, let me tell you what we mean to do about it. We'll just keep you fast here till night sets in, while your friends hunt around, and get more and more scared, believing you must have fell into the lake. Then we'll cut stick out of this place and leave you behind. Perhaps you could yell loud enough to draw 'em in here. Better be saving your breath then, boy, 'cause you'll have to do some tall shouting if you want to get out alive, after Bill and me vacate. Now, roll over and go to sleep. I'm hungry and mean to cook a bite or two." After waiting for a few minutes, and hearing nothing more, Tad ventured to peep around the rocky bend. He saw that he had sized up the situation perfectly. One man was bent over a small fire, and seemed to be busily engaged in cooking himself some food, which already began to scent the cave. From the quarter where the rumbling sounds came, the boy could see an indistinct form huddled on a blanket. The man at the fire seemed to have a bandage around his left leg, and hobbled as he walked, from which Tad supposed he must have met with an accident of some kind. This might in a measure account for their having taken refuge on the island, rather than making their safety sure by flight. He looked further, and was soon able to make out another figure lying on the rocky floor of the place. This, he had no doubt, must be his chum, Smithy. Yes, once, as the limping man threw a handful of fresh fuel on the fire, causing the flames to leap up and for a moment illuminate the place, Tad's eager eyes discovered the well-known khaki color of the Boy Scout uniform worn so jauntily by the particular new recruit. Oh, if only he could creep across the space that lay between and set the bound boy free, how gladly he would attempt it. And the more he contemplated the thing, the better satisfied did Tad become that he could accomplish it. Why, there did not seem to be any great obstacle to prevent him. Surely the man who snored so deeply would not be able to interfere, and the second fellow at the fire was so deeply concerned with getting him some lunch that apparently he had thought for nothing else. So Tad decided to make the attempt. Even if it turned out to be a failure, he believed he could elude any pursuer in the gloom of the cave entrance and manage to reach the open in safety. And the possible result was so pleasant to contemplate that he just could not resist trying for it. Accordingly, Tad started to creep around the bend. He kept as flat on his stomach as possible. Always made it a point to watch the man at the fire. If the hungry one seemed to be looking that way, Tad flattened himself out as near like a pancake as he could, and did not so much as move a finger until such time as he felt convinced that the enemy had his full attention again taken up with his work. In this cautious way, then, did the scout draw closer and closer to the figure of the captive. He hoped Smithy would be sensible and not betray him by an incautious exclamation when he learned of his presence. Now he was within a foot of the other and could hear him breathing softly as he lay there. Tad had figured it out that if he kept quiet and merely tried to feel for the other's bound hands, Smithy might let out a whoop as he felt something touch his wrists, under the belief that it might be a crawling snake. So, to avoid this chance of betrayal, Tad had determined to get his lips as close to the ear of the prisoner as he could, and then gently whisper his name. Watching for his chance, Tad found it when the man at the fire was humming a snatch of song to himself, as though care sat lightly on his shoulders. "Smithy, shh!" Tad saw a movement of the bound form. Smithy even lifted his head and turned his eyes toward the spot whence that thrilling, if soft, whisper had come. But fortunately he did not attempt to make the least sign or try to whisper back. Now that his chum had been warned of his presence, Tad believed he could proceed to the next step in his carefully arranged program. This was to reach over, find just how Smithy was tied, and, with the use of his pocket knife, which he held open in his hand, effect his release. The most risky part of the entire affair must lie in their retreat. Here Smithy, being a veritable greenhorn, was very apt to make some blunder that would draw the attention of the hungry man and result in discovery. But there was no need of wasting time when the choice lay only in one selection. Tad fumbled around until he could locate the bonds that had been tied around the wrists of Smithy. These he quickly severed, at the same time trusting to luck that he did not cut the boy with the sharp blade of his knife. Next in order, he crawled a little further and managed to saw apart another piece of old rope that had been wound around the ankles of Smithy. The latter knew what was expected of him. Perhaps it was mere instinct that told the tenderfoot, since he had never gone through any such experience as this before. But at any rate, no matter what influenced him, Smithy had already commenced to move backward. Tad was greatly tickled, as he himself expressed it later, when he saw how Smithy maneuvered, keeping his head toward the enemy while moving off, as if he just knew he ought to watch the man and lie low in case he looked. Tad had waited only long enough to fix the blanket upon which Smithy had been lying, so that it would look like a human form reclining there. This he did by causing the middle to remain poked up a foot or so in the air, by deftly crunching the folds in his hand. At a casual glance in that uncertain light, anyone over there, with his eyes dazzled by looking into the flickering firelight, might be deceived into believing that the prisoner still lay where he had been left. Foot by foot the two scouts backed away. Why, Smithy was doing as well as any experienced fellow could have shown himself capable of performing. Smithy had certainly all the qualities in him to make a first-class scout, and Tad meant to encourage the ambition to the other to the utmost, given the opportunity. Now they were turning the bend, and everything seemed to be still going smoothly. It began to look as though Tad had accomplished a task that at one time he feared would be beyond his capacity, and that freedom lay ahead for the late prisoner of the old bear's den. Just as they reached the outlet, there sounded a loud shouting coming from the interior. It could have but one meaning, and this, discovery. The hungry man had possibly walked over to say something else to Smithy, and found that the prisoner had taken French leave. "This way, and give me a hand quick!" exclaimed Tad, as he leaped out of the mouth of the den and toward the pivotal rock that hung so temptingly above. Smithy seemed to have noticed the same stone, for he threw himself against it the very instant Tad did. Their combined weight, added to the force with which they struck the trembling rock, proved to be sufficient to start it moving. It appeared to hesitate just a second, and then went crashing over, making the very ground tremble with the tremendous shock. And so the mouth of the old bear's den was sealed, imprisoning within the two fugitives from the law. End of chapter 29. Recording by Richard Kilmer, Rio Medina, Texas.